Reading with your kids.
Hello, hello, hello. Come on in, have a seat, and relax. It is so good to see your smiling face. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are dedicated to inspire families to spend more time reading together. We know that reading is a foundation for a lifelong conversation with your kids, with your family, helping them grow stronger together. We have a wonderful guest today who is going to introduce us to her brand new book called My Tiny Pet. She's also going to introduce us to that really tiny pet. Her name is Jessie Hartland. Before Jessie introduces you to her tiny pet, we want to introduce you to our sponsors. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is sponsored by Noah Noasaurus by Elaine Kylie Kearns. Do you know someone who's a Noasaurus? Is your child a Noasaurus? Is your spouse a Noasaurus? Does your child or your spouse ever have one of those days where they wake up and the answer to everything is no? Well, have I got a great picture book for you. Noah Noasaurus by Elaine Kylie Kearns. Noah Noasaurus woke up feeling very no. No to brushing his teeth, no to eating breakfast, and absolutely, definitely no to playing with his little brother. Things only get worse when Noah goes for a walk and discovers that the relentlessly cheerful Toby Rex, Brian Brontosaurus, and Avasaratops are following him. Together, the group start a bona fide dino parade that even Noah cannot resist. This lighthearted, whimsical story will have readers laughing along at Noah and his friends, as well as their own bad mood. This hilarious book pairs two of kids' favorite things, saying no and dinosaurs. Adults can also relate to waking up on the wrong side of the bed and feeling very no all day. Noah Noasaurus is available on Amazon and also at Elaine's website, ElaineKylieKearns.com. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by the Storied App. You know, one of the things we're going to be talking to our guest, Jessie Hartland, today about is about how to tell stories through pictures and through art. You know, storytelling has been such an important part of humans' growth and education for as long as humans have existed. There's a lot of us who are natural storytellers, but there's also a lot of parents and caregivers who don't have that gift of gab, and they find it difficult sometimes to tell stories or to remember stories or to come up with stories on their own. Well, I have an app that is perfect for any family. It's called the Storied App. That's right, the Storied App. This is a fantastic resource that will give you instant access to lots of original stories created by top children's storytellers from all around the globe. Looking to help your children become more mindful? Well, the Storied App has lots of stories about mindfulness. Maybe you'd like to read a story that would teach your child to be kinder. Yep, there's stories about that too. The Storied App features content from all over the world that helps kids develop a respect for other cultures and perspectives. And the stories have all been developed with the input of top children's development experts. And there's new content being added all the time. All of the Storied App stories were created to be read in about 5 minutes. So it's the perfect tool to help your kids go to sleep. The app is so easy to navigate. I mean, I really love the Storied App's special bookshelf feature that allows you to save your child's and your favorite story. This really is a super tool for every family. You can check it out today. For more information, go to trystoried.com. That's trystoried.com. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Stephen Joseph in his wonderful picture book, The Last Surviving Dinosaur, the Tartigrade. You know, reading with your kids is oftentimes all about reading out loud with your kids. And what would make for a better read out loud book than a book that has 6 cranky relatives, 3 mean dinosaurs, and 1 very cranky Tarantocrankosaurus. That's right, the last surviving dinosaur, the Tarantocrankosaurus, written by Stephen Joseph and playfully illustrated by Andy Case. This book tells a tale of how the dinosaurs became extinct. And it's not the story, you know, the meteor and all that kind of stuff. That's not the tale. Nope. The Tarantocrankosaurus is so cranky that she makes all the other bigger, meaner dinosaurs disappear. That is, until she comes across the only dinosaur who is immune to her incessant complaining, the Tarantocravetrosaurus. These two dinosaurs evolved into humans, and that's where cranky people come from. Throughout the illustrated book, the family members and dinosaurs humorously battle to have the best sauruses. Now that's a Yiddish word for big, really huge problems. And these problems include warts, alligator attacks, and brain tumors. I mean, poor cousin Dottie grew an entire forest on her feet. Oi! And the best part of this very funny book is that it's not just for cranky kids. As the storyteller says in the end, even mommy and daddy can be crankosauruses and cavetrosauruses sometimes. Turns out that everybody has a bit of Tarantocrankosaurus and Tarantocravetrosaurus in him or her. The last surviving dinosaur reminds readers to be mindful of when and how often they complain, a lesson from which all readers, young and old, can benefit. It's available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other sites where books are sold. It's The Last Surviving Dinosaur, the Tarantocrankosaurus, written by Stephen Joseph. Join us on the line right now from New York City. She is the author of so many wonderful books. Today we're talking about her brand new book called My Tiny Pet. Please welcome to the show, Jessie Hartland. Jessie, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for interviewing me.
Jessie and I were talking a little bit about My Tiny Pet, and I'm really excited to learn about this pet. So why don't you tell us about the book and tell us about this tiny pet?
Well, the book is about a girl who lives in a very hectic place, like on a tall hill, and she lives in a huge house, and she's got hundreds and hundreds of pets. She's got poodles, and she's got snakes, and she's got raccoons and mice, and she's got fish and cats, and she's even got an octopus, and she's got a goat, and she's got cats, and she's got a horse. Anyway, she's an only child. One day her parents walk in the door and they say, "That's it." So the pets have gotten into all kinds of mischief, and they've ripped up the carpeting, and the octopus has gotten into the aquarium where the fish are, and the parents decide they're going to downsize. They're going to move into a tiny house. So the girl's very sad, but all the pets go to good homes. So every pet found a new home. And so then she's living out in the country, and they're living in the middle of a green forest, but she's lonely. She really wants a pet. And so she starts to make the case. In science class, she learns they're learning about microscopes, and they're looking under the microscope at the little miniature world that exists out there in nature, but you can only see it with a microscope. So she learns about this. She gets an idea for a possible pet that wouldn't be too much trouble. So she has to make the case to her parents, that this is what's right for their house. So they live in a tiny house. She lives up in a little loft bed. The house is about, 10 feet by 30 feet or something like that. So it's very, very small. So she wants to make the case. So she says, well, what if the pet is smaller than a teacup poodle? They had one of those. No. What if it's smaller than a mouse? No. What if it's smaller than the eye of an ant? The parents say, smaller than the eye of an ant? What? Should I go on and explain?
What I'm really interested in is to learn about this little creature. You're telling me about it, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah. They live in moss, or lichen. So if you're walking out in the woods, you can get a little sample of a piece of moss, bring it home, put it in about a tablespoon of water and let it sit for a little bit, and then squeeze it out, and then take a little dropper full and look under the microscope and see if you can find a tardigrade. They have 8 legs, and they have this strange mouth that looks like a vacuum cleaner attachment, and it kind of moves in and out as they're swimming through the water. And they like to eat bacteria. They can be carnivorous, so watch for them eating each other. The tardigrade is a great pet if you're a child and you've had bad luck with maybe a dog running away, or a goldfish dying, or frog jumping out of the tank and disappearing, or who knows what, a cat getting run over. This is the pet for you, because these are just pretty indestructible. So if you go on vacation, you don't have to hire anybody to take care of it. The tardigrades can actually go without food and water for over 10 years.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that is pretty indestructible. And if you did do something to the tardigrade, then you definitely should have your pet card removed. Yeah, that's it. I mean, if you have a tardigrade die on you, that's it. Another benefit is that you can take it there, since they're so tiny, you can take your pet into a restaurant or into you could take it to school. You could take it someplace where it says no pets allowed, a big sign. You could take it on an airplane. You could take it in a restaurant. So no one will know that your tardigrade is on you, sitting on top of your hat, which is where I have the tardigrade traveling with the girl in the book. So she has a hat with a little house on the top of it, and that, with a little bit of moss on it, and that's where the tardigrade travels. Where did you get the inspiration for My Tiny Pet?
Well, I was on vacation. I was lying on a beach, and I started thinking about tiny animals. I'm not really sure why, but I had, when I was in high school, I was kind of a mediocre student, to say the most, to make the best of it. But anyway, I really loved there was a biology class called protozoology, where we would use microscopes and look at, I really liked paramecium and amoebas and volvox and all kinds of little animals, and I loved looking at them under the microscope. So originally I thought, this would be a good book. I could do a book about a paramecium. I don't think anybody's ever done that. But then I remembered that in New York City there was a show at the Museum of Natural History a few years ago. They had these very striking posters in the subway and all over the city with a photograph of a tardigrade on it. So I thought, that's such an interesting animal, because they have 8 legs and they kind of look like manatee. So they kind of look like hippos, maybe. They're very big and they kind of like very wrinkly skin, and they've got these 8 legs with claws on the end of each leg. They're really unusual looking. So then I thought, I will write a book about a tardigrade. And then I thought of the whole tiny house movement. Mm-hmm. So it kind of made sense, to put those two together, because that's kind of a trend these days,
Sure. And certainly living in New York City, you're familiar with tiny places to live.
Tiny places to live, yeah. Well, I'm lucky. I live in an old loft building, so I have a nice sized space here. But I certainly understand, what it's like to live in a little, like a cubicle place. Yeah.
I remember the first time I stayed in a hotel room in New York City, and I think I had to leave my suitcase outside of the room because it didn't fit with me.
Well, we have these capsule hotels in New York now. I had heard about them in Japan. They're kind of big over in Tokyo, but I know we have something like this in New York now. I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it. So
I've heard about them too, and I hear they're also very expensive. They're like ridiculously expensive.
Yeah. Well, just come for the day, That's good.
One of the things about your, I'm on your website and I'm looking at a lot of your illustrations. You have a fascinating illustration style.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of New York City. There's so much going on in every illustration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the details. I'm always just like looking around and soaking up all the details, looking at all the little, last week I was in a music store on West 4th Street, this old place that's been there since 1958, and they have this basement and they have all these percussion instruments. The place is just crammed with thousands of instruments, and you can just go down and just look at it very carefully and slowly if you want to.
Wow. Very cool. Now, has this always been your style, or is this something that's evolved over the years?
No, I think I've been drawing like this since I was a child. It's kind of childlike in a way, it's kind of very much drawing from my head, not sketching on sight so much, although I do that, a fair amount, but a lot of the drawing, I kind of, I write the words and I make the pictures kind of at the same time. And then I'm kind of thinking about, as I'm writing, I'm kind of thinking about like what would make a good illustration as well. So I'm trying to put those two together.
That seems to be a very different way of creating a children's book. We typically hear of the author writing a book and then sending off to an illustrator, or an illustrator again writing the story and then creating the pictures around it. I don't think I've spoken to anybody who has talked about kind of doing both at the same time.
Yeah, I do. I do both at the same time. And I write and illustrate both. And sometimes I illustrate somebody else's story if I really like something. But I do a lot of illustrating my own stories. Mm-hmm. But, I figured a tardigrade would be a fun animal to draw. So I chose that. I was just looking at under the microscope a few minutes ago, and there's some animal I'd never seen under there that's sort of has like a sticky foot, and it's tubular, but then it kind of moves around by almost like a pogo stick in a way, but it's not, it's in the water and it's kind of jumping around and, looking for food. It's so strange looking. I have no idea what it is, but, anyway, but there's nothing like a tardigrade, and tardigrade have been sent into outer space, actually. It's the first animal to have survived in outer space. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about My Tiny Pet is that we're talking about this tiny pet, but in introducing this tiny pet to our kids in this story, we're actually introducing them to a much bigger world than they're aware of, to help them understand that, yes, it's mom and dad, it's our family, it's our house, but there's this whole universe of creatures that we can't even see without the aid of a microscope.
Oh, yeah. No, it's just fascinating. I mean, you can just, sometimes I'll take a little sample of our bird bath out in the backyard. That's a good place to, look at animals under the microscope. You just take a little sample of that, or bay water, or just a little bit of water that's been outside that's, not out of the tap. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they're not in the tap water. But yeah, and you can get a microscope I didn't have a microscope when I was a child. I would have loved one, but you can get one now for like $250. It's not too bad. And, and I find that I can look at these creatures. These are just under 10 times power. So it's not a super, high-powered microscope. Mm-hmm. Kind of a low-level one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love anything that piques our kids' curiosity and helps them become more curious about the world and encourages them to get out there and to really become explorers. It's one of the things that I've done here in my home, where we're in the city of Boston, but we're on the very, very outskirts of the city, and we have a wildlife sanctuary next to our property. And it was fascinating for me when the kids were younger to kind of go outside and to start to understand how many creatures live on our property, live in the trees that are in our backyard, and then just to expand that to the microscopic beings. It's just kind of mind-blowing sometimes.
Yeah. It's really incredible what's out there. Like, for example, I live in this very, very urban area. I'm a couple blocks from the closest park, which is a very small park, and I'm up on the 9th floor, and we have a fire escape, which is like some outside stairs that go down to kind of this little almost like a little pit, at the bottom where you could get out in case of a fire. But anyway, a couple of years ago, and there's a box that was sitting in the window where maybe some birds were nesting a few years ago, pigeons. But anyway, I look in there one day and there's a raccoon living in the box, curled up in the box. And he stayed there for 2 years,
Wow.
Going out at night and then coming back. But nobody knows where he came from. It's such a mystery, never really figured it out.
Yeah.
He's gone now, but, yeah.
Very, very
Nature in the city,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is. I think it's important for our kids to kind of appreciate nature, and it's a great way to get them to turn off the screen sometimes to help them understand just how much life is around them and how many things that they can find out in nature, whether they're in a city or in the woods or in the suburbs.
Yeah. When I was a young child, I used to take walks in the woods with my father, and we lived in a city, so we were just, in a park or like a nature trail, and he would turn over a rock or a log, and then we would just look at all the insects underneath, and sometimes there'd be little lizards, little newts living under the log or the rock, and just all the different kinds of insects you would see, and you would just disturb their world for a minute, take a look, and then put the log back. Mm-hmm. But I just remember that really well. Fascinated by it.
One of as I'm looking at your website, jessiehartland.com, so many amazing books and pictures, but one that caught my eye is How the Dinosaur Got to the Museum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm happy to. I had, I'm in New York, as I said, but I thought it'd be fun to do. I'd already done a book about a Sphinx and the story behind how the Sphinx got to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And I was just thinking about, I'd like to follow that up with a second book, and dinosaurs are so interesting. I didn't really know much about them, but started writing to a paleontologist at the Smithsonian down in Washington. And I really didn't know. I knew so little about dinosaurs. I actually had a scene, and in the manuscript where these two dinosaurs, the story starts, the death of a dinosaur, because that's how you get the skeleton. Mm-hmm. And, I had these two dinosaurs in a fight that lived like millions of years apart. So I just really didn't know anything about dinosaurs. I didn't even know that we had them in the U.S. I thought they were like in some other continent. Mm-hmm. So, this paleontologist was getting tired of my questions, the stupid questions. So he finally said, look, if you want to ask me more, just sign up for my workshop in Wyoming I'm giving this summer, and then you can, have more of my time, And I think it was a real brush off, he's trying to get rid of me. Uh-huh. But then I signed up for it, by golly. I flew to Billings, Montana, and then rented a car, drove down into Wyoming. And it was fascinating. We were participating in this dinosaur dig, and they were actually digging up this, a Diplodocus longus, which is actually the specimen that I picked out at the Smithsonian to write about, which is in my book. But it really added a lot to the story to be there and, to be on site and just look at the tools. I took photographs and that's, I think it really adds a lot to the book if you can do that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, yeah. And, so you can see that specimen at the, Smithsonian in Washington, actually the Museum of, Natural History there, and I believe it's just gotten renovated, so it's probably a good time to go and take a look.
That's it seems like you have a series of how things got to the museum, and that's a really wonderful conversation to have with our kids, and just to get them to think about how things work, because there's so many miracles when you think about it around us, and also just, the little rectangular thing that's in every kid's pocket these days, and just to get them to think about how that works and how many people are involved in making your call go through or helping your text go through, and what kind of things are happening.
Yeah, I don't know if you see, I did I've done a couple of biographies, and one is about Steve Jobs, which I think kids would really like. I mean, it's more for like middle grade kids, but it's really about him and, what a genius he was. He started this company in his parents' garage, and it turned into the world's most valuable company. But I write about what he was like as a child, and, he's always tinkering and taking things apart and putting them together and going to the junkyard with his dad and bringing things back and, fixing cars and things like that. So, for techie kids, that's a good book. It's called Steve Jobs Insanely Great.
Yeah, and I see it's available in a number of different languages. How many languages?
Yeah, 15.
15.
You can read it in Estonian, you can read it in Turkish, you can read it in Spanish, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, French, Portuguese, Italian, German, let's see. Is that 15? Must be getting close.
It's getting close, yeah. and it's interesting that the first language you mentioned was Estonian. My wife had the chance to go to Estonia, and she had such a wonderful time when she was there. Beautiful country.
I was there in October, actually.
Great.
Tallinn, yes.
Wow.
Did she go to the KGB museum?
No, she didn't.
Where the KGB had been. They were in, it's in this hotel. They had taken over this top floor of the hotel where all the Westerners in Tallinn had to go. This was when it was part of the USSR. So anyway, that's something to recommend.
Yeah, we'll have to put that on the list if I return with her. You may be interested, since you have this fascination for all things microscopic. There is a fascinating and slightly bizarre and kind of unsettling museum at the Center for Disease Control down in Atlanta, Georgia.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it's right in there, so the security check to get in is pretty intense. But we went there. We had an Italian. My daughter and I were on tour. I was performing my educational magic shows down throughout the South, and we had an international student with us from Italy, and she happened to be a medical student. And so we were down there. We heard about this thing, and it caught her interest, and we thought, why not? At the very least, it'll be a great story to tell. And it was a fascinating experience.
So it's a museum of diseases that there's no cure for? Or?
Both. A museum for things that they're working on, and a museum of diseases that they've solved. And so there's a lot of great information there. But the other thing that's kind of unsettling sometimes is as you're going around looking at all these diseases and the histories and the way they were cured, and the devastation that some of them created, it's unsettling to realize that just a few floors above you, all those diseases are stored in this. They have all those crazy diseases inside this building. So that was thinking about that was a little weird.
Wow. Okay.
So My Tiny Pet is available now, and it is the latest book from our guest, Jessie Hartland. What are you working on next?
I'm sketching out a book about a truffle hound. So it's funny. It's about a dog. It's more whimsical, it's like a personified, poodle, but it's about, chocolate truffles as well as the fungi that grow underground.
Oh,
and I'm also working on a more middle grade novel, about a girl who wants to be a scientist one day, and she's met an entomologist. So it's all about entomology. So that's something I'm interested in too, the whole insect world out there.
So fun, whimsy, and curiosity about the world around us. What great things to write about. It's like you'll never run out of ideas to write about.
That's for sure. Yeah. And that's a great thing. Yeah. I don't want to run out of ideas.
Well, we think you should all introduce yourself to the Tartigrade, and you can find out all about the Tartigrade and My Tiny Pet, the latest book from Jessie Hartland. Jessie, thanks so much for being part of our show today.
Oh, thank you for interviewing me. Yes, it was a lot of fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's a really special episode of the podcast, something very, very different. Dr. Dawn Menge is going to be back on the show to celebrate her book series, the Queen Vernita Visitor Series. But she's going to be joined by Heather Clark. Heather Clark is not an author. Heather Clark is a mom of a wonderful, wonderful young woman who happens to have Rett syndrome. And Dawn based one of the characters in her Queen Vernita series on Heather's daughter. And as we've said in the episode that we had with Dr. Dawn Menge, and she's been a sponsor in the show, we're talking about the fact that the Queen Vernita Visitor Series is a great way to help kids understand that folks with challenges and disabilities can be great friends. You're just going to learn a little bit about somebody very special in my life, a young girl named Jennifer, who also has Rett syndrome, somebody that was she's been very, very special to me for a long time. But I first met her when she was 10 years old. And you'll hear about Jennifer, and you'll hear a little bit more about the Queen Vernita series, and you may even hear about how I met my beautiful wife. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, I want to thank the people who made today's show so very wonderful. Want to thank our Jessie Hartland, my teeny pet. Lots of great, really fun, funky illustrations and a wonderful story. Great way to get kids interested in STEM and about the world around them and all the creatures that live with us and some of them on us. We also want to thank our sponsor, Stephen Joseph, the author of The Last Surviving Dinosaur, the Tarantacranchosaurus. Make sure you check out that book. Elaine Kylie Kearns, the author of Noasaurus, a super fun book for people who wake up on the wrong side of the bed. It's actually a super fun book for anybody, no matter what side of the bed you wake up on. And we also want to thank our friends at the Storied App. The Storied App. Check it out at trystoried.com. Hey, I need to very much thank my producer, Fatima Khan. She is amazing. You don't want to miss her blog. She writes a blog for every episode of the show, and that can be found at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my aforementioned beautiful wife for all of the support that she gives me, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you, my beautiful listener, for everything you do to help make this show a success. You let your friends know about this show. You help spread the word. You subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, on wherever you find your podcast. And that really helps other people find out about the show. But most of all, we want to thank you for really making a difference in the world, really making the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.